We will now begin the History of Bingo panel. Mr. Eric Casey, General Sales Manager, Planet Bingo. Mr. Mark Newton, Director of Regulatory Compliance, Video King. Mr. Gordon Jardine, Project Development Facilitator, Chickasaw Nation Enterprises. Mr. Skip Lannert, Executive Vice President, Multimedia Games. Mr. Nelson Johnson, President, Eagle Star Advisors. Mr. Michael Fletcher, CEO, Nova Gaming. Please come forward. Each panelist will have 15 minutes. When you see the yellow caution light, there will be 2 minutes left. Mr. Newton, please give us your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson and Commissioners. My name is Mark Newton. I work with Video King. We're a manufacturer and provider of handheld, fixed-based, and bingo hall equipment. I've been working for Video King for about 11 years, and so sitting at this panel, I feel I'm the new kid on the block, so you have to bear with me as being a babe in the woods. I was honored to serve on the Industry Advisory Committee that helped draft the technical standards, and it's an honor to be able to speak today before this committee. We were asked to speak about the history of bingo, and I thought it was perhaps pertinent to talk about what I think bingo is. In my role with Video King, I travel extensively to a lot of different jurisdictions. Like Eric had in the presentation, bingo industry is not just tribal, it's also military, it's also charitable, it's international, it's in a lot of different areas. And through that time, I've managed to see a lot of different experiences with different types of bingo. And so it goes back to the whole question of what really is Class 2 and where Class 2 comes from. And it seems that a lot of time is focused onto the Class 2 upright machines, and people sort of forget about session bingo. On the panel that was helping to write, or the committee that was helping to write the technical standards, one of the things that I was talking to them about was that the Class 2 gaming system includes a Scrabble bag with some tiles in it and the beans on a hard card. And if you put those together with 2 cards and 2 players and a caller, that's a Class 2 gaming system. And therefore, the technical standards have to be as applicable to that system as it is to the most advanced networked, computerized, upright systems that you can find on the marketplace. And that's quite a broad range of just different technologies. And on the basis of those technologies, there's a lot of different games that are played. I thought it was interesting to play that video, and I appreciate your indulgence in sitting in the crowd to watch that. And of key emphasis of that was that it was copyrighted in 1987, so it predates IGRA. And the challenges that were faced are still the same challenges that we have today. I mean, they talked about different things like, it was an aid for the player to play the game of bingo where they wouldn't miss any of their bingos on their cards. But it didn't fundamentally change the nature of the game. And it improved the integrity of the game. And those are the features that we look at today when we're taking a look at Class 2 systems, is it aids the player in playing the game and doesn't change the fundamentality of the game itself. So those challenges that predate IGRA are still with us today, and as we're still trying to encompass and comprehend all this. Part of the NIGC's self-imposed mandate, I guess, was the classification standards, and one of the things that they had come out with that was that there was to be no pre-drawn numbers. And I've got a number of items that I want to introduce into evidence, and I'll just pass them off at the end of it. But one of them that I'd like to speak to is a patent that was issued by the U.S. Patent Office in 1986, and the patent number for those that care is 5265880. The patent numbers are usually quite a bit longer than that. That just sort of tells you how old this patent is. And this patent speaks to quickshot and bonanza bingo, and it's a style of bingo that's played across North America. A typical bonanza game is on the basis of you're going to come into the bingo hall, they're going to start up the blower, and they'll call out a number of balls, usually about 48 balls. And then they'll sell cards to the player. And the player will come in and open up sealed cards and mark them with these 48 pre-drawn balls. And on that basis, they'll determine whether or not their card is close to a bingo or far away from a bingo. And then they'll optionally resell that card back, trade that card back in, spend another $1 and get 2 more cards. And it promotes more card sales for this game, and typically that's your jackpot game. There's 2 variants of the game. One is called a quickshot bonanza game, which has pre-drawn numbers. And in that variant of the game, the player will be able to open up their ticket, daub their cards, and find prizes. They'll find interim prizes. And actually, the patent includes the game that is called instant bingo, where those cards that you open up, you will be able to redeem for a prize immediately, and at your option, either leave or stay in the bingo hall. And I'm not sure if that was what was the intent of IGRA when they talked about instant bingo, but that this patent and the play of the game predates IGRA and was available and in the marketplace in 1986. When you talk about bingo, my mother is an educator, and every time she thinks of bingo, she thinks of bingo as a tool to aid her students in understanding different topics. And just a quick search of the internet, I found a couple of different games you can get on the internet. There's one that's called USA Bingo, and it actually has pictures of the states on each of the cards. It happens to be a 5x5 card, sort of like a traditional bingo game, but they're using designators of different states. They also, this one is called a place value bingo, and it uses a 4x2 card, which I had never seen before, and actually has the number 813 on it. So it's a little bit bigger than your 75 balls that you traditionally have in bingo. As Eric touched on, there's a variety of the bingos that are played in UK. They play a 90 number game on a 3x9 card, but they also play what they call mechanized cash bingo, which is an 80 number game that's played kind of sort of like a Keno game, and they play on a 4x4 grid. And so I always think it's kind of funny, people talk about the free space, and a 4x4 grid doesn't have a center space to have a free space. And even in the United States, there's a lot of different varieties of bingo. You can go online, look at Wikipedia, and it'll describe a bunch of different kinds of bingo, and you can get all sorts of different kinds of paper. There's a paper card from Fort McDowell Bingo, which is shaped like a Christmas tree, for a seasonal game that they sold. And I think that was back in the 80s. There's also different kinds of bingo, like, for instance, You Pick 'em Bingo. And You Pick 'em Bingo, I think, is a unique game style in that the player is the one that's determining what their card is and the generation of that card. And they could take different formats. They're used in different jurisdictions across North America. Some of them will play with 8 numbers, some will play with 9, some will play with 7. And they'll play to a different, they'll play to a blackout typically, or to a pattern. And then we can also get to different things like the, what I like to call is games similar to bingo. A lot of people, you ask what a game similar to bingo is, and they can't really think of one. And I think that the IGRA has 3 different, it's a 3-legged stool, and you have to have all 3 elements in order to have a bingo game. And so I would think that if you had a game that was similar to bingo, you must have at least 2 of those legs, and maybe you don't quite have the 3rd one. And the example that I have of that is what they call boardroom bingo or buzzword bingo. And those types of games are, you're given a grid, typically it's 5x5. Buzzword bingo, they'll put different names and catchphrases in, like brainstorm or core business, and you'll go to a meeting, and someone will, every time they hear these different phrases, they'll mark the cards, and the first one to get it, whatever the pattern is, wins. And the reason I say that's a game similar to bingo and not bingo is because IGRA requires you to have objects that you're drawing with either numbers or designators on them or randomly drawn by a computer system. But what these games do, and this is just a Budweiser one, which is based on Monday Night Football, where if you get, if a pass of 20 yards is a certain square. And these are event-driven games where the random number isn't a number. The random number is a random event that occurs, and so I think that's a game similar to bingo. And this breadth of different bingo games just shows you that the technology can play all of these different games. And so what is your fundamental element of bingo? It's not dictated by the number of balls that you're playing with. It's not dictated by the pattern. It's not dictated by, what is it dictated by? And I think that's the fundamental question, is what are you playing when you're playing bingo? Here's one I don't think is a game of bingo, but you can find that on the internet as well. It's called bovine bingo, or also known as cow patty bingo. And then you take a cow and you put it into a field, and you have grids marked off on the field, and wherever the cow leaves its mark, so to say, dictates who the winner is.
That with a chicken.
So I don't know how germane that is to the questions, and I'm more than willing to answer questions that relate to electronics and things and whatever, but I think that it's key to the understanding when you're talking about Class 2 games and bingo, what we are talking about, and the session-based bingo is an important and integral part. Yesterday, J.R. Matthews talked about the importance of maintaining the Class 2 gaming supplier to the Indian country to have that leverage. And I think that this sort of same sort of token, the session bingo hall it was the core and the start of Indian gaming. You'd see a lot of the sprung structures and the tents, and they started playing bingo, and it built into these great casinos. And some of the casinos have got away from playing session bingo. Here at Sycuan, they got a beautiful bingo hall. I mean, unfortunately, they have Eric's products in, not mine, but what can you say? But it just goes to the appeal and the attraction of the game itself. And like Eric was saying, with the cosmic bingo and the mystic bingo, it's just a redefinition of what the game of bingo is, but the core elements of it haven't changed. Just like in 1987 with the introduction of the bingo brain and a new level of technology that did not alter the game, you still have today different levels of entertainment, different levels of technology that are still playing bingo. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jardine?
Madam Chairman, members of the Sycuan Gaming Commission, and guests, good afternoon. My name is Gordon Shadeen, and I spent about the last 35 years of my life working in the gaming industry. 5.5 years working specifically with the Muskogee Creek Nation in Oklahoma, and then the last 2.5 years working for the Chickasaw Nation in Oklahoma, actually not working as a manager, but in building their casino facilities. The balance of my time was with a gaming company called Multimedia Games. Prior to that, I was in the newspaper radio station business, where I really got started in bingo as a volunteer, working with many of the nonprofits, just working as a volunteer. You did everything from cleaning the floors, to be the caller, to sell the cards, to do the accounting. In addition to that, over the years, I've had the pleasure of doing some lobby work in Congress while I was with the Creeks. I testified before Congress. They were working on the National Indian Gaming Act, managed games, and helped tribes work on their games, and even did a little internal auditing for some of the tribes that were having some problems internally. I want to take just a few minutes and go back, because this kind of leads into a part of Indian bingo. Working in the charities, the American Legions, the Elks, the VFWs, and the church. The bingo games and those charities was pretty static back in the 70s. 12 games a night, a mini jackpot game and a big jackpot game. It was basically pari-mutuel. You pay out $5 for each regular game, and while the regular games were being played, you counted all the money, deducted about 50% for the house, and then deducted the payouts for the regular games, and you split the balance 70-30, 30% for the small jackpot and 70% for the big jackpot. Games were played in some of the halls on the hard cards, as we saw earlier, with the numbers printed on those cards. Some of the players used a corn to cover those cards. Others used pennies, and then here came the chips. And then to keep the chips from falling all over the floor, somebody came up with this magnetic wand that you could spread over the card after the game was over, pick them all up and put them in a jar and start and get ready for the next game. And then one night, kind of an interesting thing happened at the Elks, as I remember. A player came up and said, I was in Minneapolis not too long ago, and I went and played bingo in a hall where they played for thousands of dollars. $150, $200 games and jackpots that were $100,000 or more. Now that's the kind of game we need at our charity game. Well, one weekend I took a little time and I went into Minneapolis, and I finally found out where they were talking about, and that was Little Six Bingo, run by the Mdewakan Sioux tribe out in Shakopee. And sure enough, just as they said, there it was, a big 1,200-seat hall, packed to the gills, and people sitting there playing, and they were using hard cards and chips. So I took all the information I could gather up and took it all home and talked to a bunch of the players one night after the game and said, I think it's time for a change. I saw some things in Minneapolis. I can't do the kinds of games that we're seeing there because we just don't have that many players, but we can do a variation of that and pare it down a little bit. But I said, I want to do some things. I want to put a camera on the ball. I want to put the balls up on the screens. Nobody in South Dakota ever seen anything like that. We had people from all around the state coming to look at this new kind of bingo. because we moved then from the old slide cards and the hard cards, we moved into paper bingo. But it wasn't traditional paper bingo as most people knew it. It was what they called the Mark 75. The free space was gone. And so you could start playing, and all of a sudden people found out, boy, this is easy. I know that when I start to daub my card, and I can start playing more cards now because I can keep track of them, if they call B1, I pick the one. I don't have to, if it's happened to be on the top, I don't have to go to the bottom to find any more ones because I know there's only one on that strip of 3. Go to the next one. First of all, before you know it, they were, instead of playing 6 cards or 9 cards or 12 cards, they were playing 18 cards, 24 cards, 36 cards. And they'd have played more, but they didn't have any more room on the table. But anyway, that was charity bingo, and one of the players one time came to me and said, where do you come up with all these different varieties of games that we're now playing? We're playing 4, 5, and 6 games on every strip. We're playing along the way games, and then we're going to a jackpot. And I said, well, I was taught by the Indians. And everybody laughed, and they said, oh, I don't believe that. And I said, well, go to Minneapolis, and you'll see it. Well, then 1983 came along, and a good friend of mine, a Sioux Indian by the name of John Artichoker, used to work for the Bureau of Indian Affairs here out in Arizona as an area director, got a hold of me one day, and he had been at a NCIA meeting and met some of the people from Oklahoma, and they wanted to get in the bingo business. So he came to me and he said, do you suppose you could run a bingo game in Oklahoma? And I said, I guess I could run a bingo game anywhere. You know, he said, I'm talking about a real bingo game where they play for the big money. I'm talking about an Indian reservation now. And I said, yeah. I said, I was taught by the Indian people, I said, how to play big games. I had to pare the games down to make it work in the charities. I guess we can just turn around and go right back up again, and that's what we did. I went down there and assisted in the construction and the opening of a new bingo hall for the Muskogee Creek Nation. We started using a combination of hard cards and paper. And in about 6 months, we started giving players a choice. Do you want to play on hard cards or do you want to play on paper or both? Well, about 2 months later, we had only a half a dozen people that were playing on any of the hard cards anymore. It was strictly all paper. So the day after Christmas, the only day we closed, people came back and the hard cards were gone, and we started to play on all paper. Well, we got a lot of criticism. The Gaming Commission there thought it was way too expensive to buy all that paper and just throw it away. But we quickly were able to show him that we were getting a lot more play, people were spending a lot more money, and the games were going a lot faster. We were adding more games, which meant we could charge more, and then we, of course, could make more. And, of course, the players thought, hey, the more cards I can play, the better chance I've got to win, right? Well, little did they know, but we let them believe that. They were able to daub those cards fast. In fact, let me make a point here. We had a gentleman that came to our hall one day, and they talk about marking your cards until there's a bingo called. This guy had 48 cards that we put down in front of him. He stood up and turned around with his back to the cards, and the caller commenced calling the balls. And all of a sudden he hollers, bingo. And the clerk went over and said, well, sir, you haven't marked any of your cards. He said, I know. She said, well, you just hollered bingo. Where's the bingo? He said, look in the third row, the third card down. And so they went over and looked up on the flashboard and verified with the flashboard, because they weren't marked on the card or marked with a chip or coins or anything. And sure enough, there was a bingo. Well, we couldn't believe it. Let's try it again. Only this time we didn't have the other players involved. And come to find out, he had been all over the country doing this and had a photographic mind. He could look at other cards, do it. Just to prove a point, you don't really have to mark your cards in order to get a bingo. He could do it without ever seeing it. And I was talking to Eric last night, and he said he saw the same thing, so it's a true story. Well, we got the bingo hall open and we were going, and then all of a sudden, in 1984, the district attorney in Tulsa, Oklahoma, decided that the Creek Nation bingo facility was a public nuisance. Now, we had a little help on that one. We found out about 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon that they were going to come in and try and shut us down on Monday. A tribal attorney by the name of Jeff Standing Bear, we called him, and he came in and he said, well, they can't do that. And I said, well, I didn't think so, but the rumor is that they're going to try. Well, Jeff and a gentleman by the name of John Eccles, also an attorney in Tulsa, worked all weekend, and on Monday morning, we filed an action in the federal district court to keep them from coming on our property and filing those papers. That afternoon, they filed against the Creeks in state court. And we went through a long trial, and we won it. We weren't a public nuisance. The fact that we were playing on a Sunday afternoon, or the fact that we were playing for hundreds of thousands of dollars, or the fact that we were using paper rather than hard cards, and a number of other things that they put in the complaint, didn't make any difference. The other part of it was that the attorneys that were trying that case for the district attorney's office didn't know a whole lot about Indian law. And what they were contending is that we weren't on Indian land. We weren't even on trust land, or vice versa. And for those of you that don't know it, once a tribe owns a piece of property, in order to sell it, you have to have the permission or authorization from the area office to do so. But if it's trust land, you need to have a bill passed in Congress that allows you to sell it. And nowhere could they ever find in a congressional record anywhere that that land had ever been transferred from the tribe and approved by Congress. And so we won that case, but they weren't satisfied. They took it on to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, and they lost there. About that time, the Attorney General from Oklahoma called them up and says, you guys got to stop. He said, you're establishing case law. He said, we can't stand that. Well, as it turned out, the Supreme Court wouldn't grant cert, and we had ourselves a good case. That happened to be Indian Country USA versus the district attorney in Oklahoma, along with the Creek Nation. I can also tell you that I think that the thing that's important, that as part of that trial, having a strong gaming commission and having strong internal controls made a big difference. But the best part of it was the final statement the judge made after reviewing everything and realizing even though that land had been sold several times illegally, it still belonged to the tribe, and his final statement said, in my opinion, this is Indian country in its purest form. And that stands as of today. Interesting. In 1986, a gentleman by the name of Yuri Itkus, he was with, had a company called Fortunate Bingo, came on the scene with a fixed base unit. Wasn't as nice as the one Eric showed you on the screen. It was a big box and had a great big screen inside of it. But he could track up to 250 cards with that particular unit. And of course, it was set up in such a way that playing 250 cards, how do you track that? The computer did it. It kept bringing the best cards forward and placing the one that was closest to a bingo forefront, so you could track those. And then about a year later, 1987, and we have a tape to verify that we just saw a few minutes ago, some people from the Bingo Brain came by, and they said, you don't want that big fixed base unit, it takes too much space. We've got this little one here that you can play anywhere, and we can, you can play just as many cards on it if you want. And so that's the one we started looking at. I guess the point is that with that kind of play, with that many cards, we became a real entertainment venue in the community. We had music, we had super games, buy-ins of 100, 250, and we had weekend marathons worth $500 per player. And we sold them out. Not at the door. It was all pre-sold before we ever played. We played all-night pajama games. We had night owl sessions. We had matinees. We even had the morning coffee club session for the moms after they took their kids to school. We gave them free coffee and rolls. The Gaming Commission came around and said, those big rolls are too big. Cut them in four, he said, you won't have to buy so many. We also came up with other kinds of different games, and one day we asked our employees to sit with us and start making up games. And that established what we called our crazy bingo night. The stupidest way you could play possible games, any which way, and we played them, and we had the biggest crowds coming to those crazy bingo nights because we were giving people a variety. It was entertainment, it was fun, it was a getaway, and we started going through the catalogs then, and we found many other games like poker flush bingo, triangle, double action, coverall, bonanza bingo, do-it-yourself, and many, many more. We even had one game where the first number out tells. Some people call it the pig game. And so if you bingoed on that one number, anywhere on your card, you won that prize in addition to the regular bingo. And we have two corners, and we had shotgun. Some people called it the scatter game. There was, all you needed was 5 numbers in your card anywhere. It didn't matter what it was, but we were playing that game where play your regular game, and if for an extra bonus, over here, just find 5 numbers when they're called on this card on the side, and we'll give you an extra $1,000. I bring all this up for the record to emphasize that we played a lot of different games, some using the free space and some not. So-called patterns varied from one number to filling the full card. And keep in mind that this was all pre-1988. A variety of games on paper, electronics were on the scene, and tribes were using these, and it was all pre-88. But, while we were having fun here at home playing bingo, things were brewing in Washington. Someone up there decided that the Native Americans were making too much money and nobody was regulating or auditing their games. Well, give me a break, will you? I'm going to tell you about our accounting. We have an accounting department in our facility that had to find every penny every night. We had internal auditing. We had tribal auditors. And then we had the Big Ten auditing firm that had to come in at the end of the year and do it again. And then, of course, we also had the Gaming Commission to boot. Always looking over your shoulder to find out what was going on and making sure you were doing everything right. In fact, one night, I got called into the National Council's chambers, and they asked me a number of questions. And it was kind of funny. I didn't really realize why I was there. And then finally, toward the end, somebody said, tell me how, if you're short 25 or 50 cents on a night, what do you do? And I said, we try to find it. Well, how do you justify spending 3 or 4 hours of two people's times recounting and looking for 25 cents or 50 cents? I said, well, that's pretty simple. If I don't look for 25 or 50 cents tonight, I'll be looking for $1 or $10 tomorrow night. Go back to Washington. Word was out that there was some senators and congressmen getting pressure from the nonprofits to regulate Indian gaming and to try to put us out of business. The tribes had no lobbyists working for them on their behalf. And at that time, which was in about 84, 85, a task force was set up. I don't know if too many people really remember that, but there was a group of tribal leaders from across the country that came together in a special meeting to set up a group, and they asked for donations solicited from the tribes that had bingo games based on the number of seats in the hall. This task force was set up to challenge any efforts by Washington to try and regulate us. We kept saying we did not need oversight. We did not need a gaming commission. Most of us, even in the early days, already had a gaming commission. You heard JR talk about that yesterday. I was wrong. I thought that we had one of the first gaming commissioners at Creek Nation. JR says he started his in '82, and I think we started in '83. But more power to him. I just want to, for the record, make note that there was an Indian gentleman that I'll never forget, and I've missed ever since he passed away. His name was Bill Foster. He was the first gaming commissioner from Oklahoma, Muskogee Creek Nation. And we used to disagree quite a bit on different things because I was in the gaming business and he was a regulator, and he wasn't sure that I should be doing it that way. But I'll tell you, we always came out of his office as one, and made sure the employees knew that whatever that screaming and hollering was behind the door was all for the good of the operation, and gaming would go on as usual. Well, the task force, as I said, was trying to make sure that we kept out in front and tried to keep any regulation from happening. And then we heard the word that Harry Reid from Nevada and George Miller from California were going to sponsor legislation that would put all Indian gaming under the rules and jurisdiction of the states. And because of Tony Coelho's positions and the unfriendliness toward the Native Americans, the call went out to all the tribes to start lobbying their congressmen to support what became the National Indian Gaming Act as it moved through Congress. We had a great friend in Mo Udall, and Frank Ducheneau, who you heard a couple of days ago. Well, the first House bill didn't make it in '87. It was a Senate bill that finally passed and was signed by the President in '88. And as we heard, although most of us didn't like it, it was better than the alternative of being under state regulation and having to play for $5 games and not being able to play when we wanted to, and you couldn't play after 9 o'clock at night, or you couldn't serve free coffee, or whatever the regulations were in the various states. And I hate to say that, but it was better than the alternative at the time. One of the things that came out of that bill that was helpful is we could start advertising. And although I didn't pay much attention to that, I was doing bingo schools. I couldn't advertise as such, but I could advertise a bingo school and let them know that there was a bingo hall there and they were paying, come down and learn how to play to win those big prizes. And I passed that around to all my friends and people like Mike Lombardi and all that as we traveled around the country. The way the bill was written, protecting the tribes and the use of the new and yet unnamed technology, laid the groundwork for its first test. And that was a linked satellite game that would span the nation and produce million-dollar winners. It was a dream of mine while at Creek Nation. I tried to put it together on my own with the help of some outside investor that one of the tribal people found, but when our CEO finally started checking out his background, we discovered that the money that he had was not worth the paper it was printed on. There was a gentleman by the name of Gordon Graves, the founder of Gammon International and later Multimedia Games, that contacted me about that game, and I told him the story, and he got real excited about the idea and said that he only had one comment, and that was, I was thinking too small, that this game really should be a national game. It needed to be a national game, and they started working on it, and we started planning on it, and the first game was played in November of '88. And at the peak of the game, about 3 years later, we had over 70 tribes across the nation that were playing the same game in real time, under the same contract and same agreement. A historical first in Indian country was the satellite bingo game that originated from the Creek Nation Tulsa Bingo facility. I left Great Nation Bingo in the summer of '89 and joined Multimedia Games, traveling the U.S., signing up tribes for that satellite game. A couple years later, we took another bold step. We took the bingo paper and we put it on a video screen and let the players play video bingo before, during, and after the regular sessions, and it was called Mega Mania. It did okay, but it was kind of slow. So anyway, one day we were sitting in the conference room and talking with some of the engineers and said, you know, why don't we shrink that card down a little bit and put some reels on that box? And then when a player, as an example, got a 4 corners, the computer would tell the machine to stop on 3 cherries. And the player could look up there and say, oh, I got 3 cherries. I just won 10 credits or 20 credits, whatever the game it was. And that was the beginning of the bingo slot that we've been hearing about today. Started in a boardroom at Multimedia Games back in the mid-1996. Skip's going to tell you a little bit more about the court cases that followed and the millions of dollars that Multimedia spent over the next years in trying to defend that game on behalf of the tribes that were raided on New Year's Eve of 1997. We won both of those cases too. And that's why we've still got Class Bingo here today. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to some of your questions, and thank you for the opportunity of coming here. It's been a great pleasure to kind of see my history in the bingo world come on the big screen.
Thank you. Mr. Lannert?
Thank you. Madam Chairperson, Commissioners, guests, let me take a moment first to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today and be part of this historic gathering on Class II gaming. I think it's something our industry will benefit greatly from, and something we probably should have done a long time ago. I joined Multimedia Games in 1995, coming from a different part of the gaming world. I'd never been involved with tribal gaming or with bingo prior to that time. I actually came from the parimutuel horse racing industry, first as a consultant, and in early 1996 I became the Vice President and Director of Operations for Multimedia. I was very excited because my joining the company coincided with the launch of the Mega Mania game. Gordon Graves took me to Concho, Oklahoma to see Mega Mania being played on System 12 Bingo King machines, and I was incredibly impressed with that game for a couple of reasons. The keys to Mega Mania were that players in multiple sites were competing in a straight line bingo game. The object of the game was to get a single straight line bingo. If you did that within 9 numbers, you won a small jackpot. If you did that within the first 4 numbers, you won a great big jackpot that was a progressive prize. And of course, every game was, numbers were drawn until there was a winner. The hook to Mega Mania was that it was patterned after a game called chip-up bingo. Others call it ante-up bingo. The idea being that players paid a quarter per card for every 3 drawn balls. At any point in the game, the players could drop those cards and stop paying for more rounds of balls. It was extremely popular right out of the gate. It was also extremely controversial for reasons I'll talk about in a minute. Coming from a different industry to this one, I had to get up to speed very, very quickly. And the 2 gentlemen on either side of me here were a big part of how I got started in my education in Indian gaming and in bingo. One of the first things I did was I read IGRA to find out what the basis was for being able to play this game on tribal lands. And once I started doing that, then I had to read the legislative history that Frank alluded to yesterday. as I became more involved in running the operation and, for lack of a better description, fending off some attacks, what I found was that what I'd read on paper, what I'd read in IGRA, what I had read in the legislative history did not comport with what I was seeing and what I was dealing with on a daily basis. IGRA said that the tribes were going to have maximum flexibility to use technology to enhance their bingo and Class II enterprises. Yet, I was looking at the National Indian Gaming Commission, certain Justice Department people, whose goal, it seemed to me, and remember, I was a newbie, their goal seemed to be to make sure that the tribes couldn't use technology, that they couldn't expand the amount of money that their games were making. It took me a long time to come to grips with that. Well, to make a long story short, in mid-1996, the National Indian Gaming Commission, in a letter signed by Chairman Monto, did in fact issue a letter to Multimedia Games saying that Mega Mania was a Class II game in its original form. Shortly thereafter, leadership at the NIGC changed. The new leadership and certain people in the General Counsel's office at NIGC clearly did not agree with Chairman Monto. They immediately started discussing with us potential changes to the Mega Mania game. It was clear that certain parties in both the Justice Department and the NIGC were determined to stop this game from playing. In 1997, executives from Multimedia worked with NIGC Council on issues to change the Mega Mania game to be more to their liking. After discussions with our tribal customers and their regulators, we actually agreed to make a couple changes to the game. One of them was we changed the interim prize structure to replace it with a Corner Mania game that was mentioned yesterday and eventually became part of a court case. We also agreed to come up with a scheme to add a sleeper feature to the game, which is something the Mega Mania game did not include before. We thought that was all behind us, but then lo and behold, we faced an incredibly overzealous U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Oklahoma. This U.S. attorney came from the school that believed if a device was being used to play a game of chance of any kind and it plugged into a wall, it had to be a slot machine. This, of course, despite the fact that IGRA had specifically carved out an exception for the tribes to use in the play of Class II gaming with electronic aids. So despite the letters, despite the agreement to go forward with Mega Mania, on New Year's Eve in 1997, my plan that day was to simply watch some football games on television. Bright and early at 9 o'clock, I got a call from Amy at Central Control. Amy was my supervisor on the morning shift. She said, "Good morning, Skip. There's a special agent standing next to me and he'd like to have a word with you." Thus began the multiple court cases that many have alluded to here. Fortunately, we were not wholly unprepared. We certainly knew the objections that were out in the marketplace to Mega Mania. We were somewhat prepared for this eventuality. We got the network back up in 12 hours. The problem was that New Year's Eve was the most profitable day traditionally at tribal bingo halls. So just the very act of raiding us on that morning and bringing down that network by itself cost the tribes, our tribal customers, a lot of money. On that morning, they raided our headquarters, which was the communication center of the game. They raided our live ball draw, which was at a Choctaw Nation facility, Arrowhead Resort, south of Tulsa. And they raided 3 sites that were playing Mega Mania. They raided 2 Cherokee sites, Catoosa and West Siloam Springs, and they raided the Seneca Cayugas Grove Bingo Hall. Within a couple of weeks, we did have a go-forward plan with the NIGC, negotiated with our tribal partners. Jess was one of the key people involved in those discussions, where they allowed us to keep playing the game while the court decided whether it was legal to do so or not. I'll shorten the story a little bit, and certainly as I talk about this and start talking about legal things, please understand I'm not an attorney. I do promise you that if I make mistakes, the esteemed attorneys that will follow us to talk about litigation in Class II gaming will make a point of correcting me. But within a little over a year, well, before I get off on that tangent, in addition to the zealous civil action that was instigated by the U.S. Attorney in the Northern District of Oklahoma, he also convinced his counterpart in the Northern District of California to take a similar action. So simultaneously, in 2 different districts, there were court cases going on relative to the Class II status and legality of Megamania. Within about a year, in both cases, summary judgments were issued in favor of the tribes and Multimedia Games, saying that Megamania was in fact a Class II game. The Oklahoma decision was certainly clearer, without nuance. In fact, the last 3 words of that decision were, Megamania is bingo. That was the last words on that ruling before the judge signed the order. In California, the case was a little more nuanced. I think Frank alluded to it yesterday. What they said was, well, Megamania might be bingo, but even if it's not bingo, it's certainly a game similar to bingo, so in either case, it's Class II. The zealous U.S. Attorney got permission from the Justice Department to appeal those decisions to the 9th and 10th Circuit. In the fall of the year 2000, both circuits came back upholding the summary judgments that the circuit judges had issued. That effectively ended the Megamania case, and was certainly a great day of rejoicing for Multimedia Games. We were very pleased for our tribal customers. What happened next was that Gordon Graves called us all together, including our attorneys, our engineers, our executives, he said, it seems to me that these cases are going to give us a lot of clarity as to what we can do in Class II gaming. So he challenged us. He said, let's sit down and say, let's create the next game. Let's create the next technology to take advantage of the Megamania court cases. We spent some time looking line by line at the rulings, but the truth was, in the end, we collectively said, we're taking too tight a view of this. The truth is, what the courts did was they said, folks, the definition of bingo included in IGRA is sufficient. Bingo is what IGRA says it is. It is not anymore. If you do these 3 things, it is bingo. It was that simple, and it was from that premise that we sat down Thanksgiving weekend in 2000, and taking advantage of one other thing that came out of those court cases, with the courts saying that IGRA's definition was sufficient. Of course, we, as opposed to other views you've heard repeated here, said, well, then what they said about instant bingo must be true as well. So we created a new game called Megananza. Megananza was an instant bingo game with an alternative display that just happened to look like a slot machine. We had launched in 1998 a game called Evergreen Bingo. At the advice of the NIGC, we pulled that back. We did not yet have the clarity of the Megamania decisions. We pulled that game back, but we didn't give up on the dream of offering an alternative, entertaining display of bingo results. Once we had the Megamania decisions behind us, we invented Megananza. That was Thanksgiving weekend 2000. The last week of January, roughly 60 days later, we actually launched the first Megananza games at a Chickasaw Nation facility in Oklahoma. The first tribal gaming authority to pass judgment on Megananza was the Chickasaw Nation's gaming commissioner at the time, Tracy Burris, and their attorney, Jess Green. Within 2 weeks, we had Megananza playing at 3 other Chickasaw sites. Within 90 days, we had Megananza playing at 15 Oklahoma sites. Within 6 months, we had Megananza on 40 tribal locations coast to coast. The game was a phenomenon. It was earning roughly 2.5 to 3.5 times as much money for our tribal customers as Megamania had, and it was beginning to be copied by our competitors. By the end of the year 2001, there were other companies marketing similar games and bringing similar and different technologies to do so. One of these companies was Rocket Gaming. One of these companies was Video Gaming Technologies. Another competitor of ours, American Gaming Systems, AGS, took a different approach to get to a similar place. While we relied on instant bingo, pulling that from the IGRA definition of Class II games, what AGS did was they said, well, we're going to do lotto instead. We're going to create a lotto game, and they launched a game that they called Liberty Sevens that was also fabulously successful and also used an alternative display of the results. In the spring of 2002, we had known all along that the National Indian Gaming Commission was not pleased with any game at that time that used an alternative display that looked like a slot. They had different objections to it, but they made it very clear. We weren't offering the Megananza game in a vacuum, so that when, in May of 2002, when the NIGC issued a notice of violation to the Chickasaw Nation relative to Megananza, we already had in the can, as we say in the business, a standard sequence bingo game. Standard sequence meaning that the NIGC's primary objection to Megananza was it was a pre-drawn game. Mark described something similar earlier in his quick shot, was it? They didn't like the idea that the numbers were drawn before the cards were sold. Well, we had this standard sequence bingo game that we called real-time bingo in the can, and so to make a long story short, when the NIGC took this action, we agreed with our Chickasaw customer and our other customers that we would, as quickly as we could, replace the game with this standard sequence real-time bingo game. We also filed suit against the NIGC, a case that I'll only say eventually went away because the court basically said we did not have the standing as a vendor to sue the NIGC, basically. Correct me later, Jess, if that's not accurate. And by the end of 2002, we had actually replaced all but a couple locations that were playing Megananza with real-time bingo. That was the launch of alternative displays, bingo slots, as has been described here. Over the last few years, the controversy has never gone away. I believe when we started with our work group a couple of years ago to work with the NIGC and tribes and others to craft technical standards, we counted that there were more than 30 companies offering some kind of electronic bingo games using alternative displays. Let me conclude by saying that when I first came to this business, again as an outsider looking in, I quickly came to the conclusion that there were three forces that were acting against the tribes in their determination to use electronic aids to enhance their Class 2 operations, as IGRA said it was going to allow. The first of these, and this is something that's never gone away, certain people in the Justice Department, from time to time on the NIGC, had a firm belief that there was something wrong with the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, which gave the tribes an exemption to the Johnson Act. IGRA was 3 decades after the Johnson Act. The people taking this like a duck point of view that was discussed yesterday, the idea that if it looks like it's a slot, it's got to be, were using that long before alternative displays came along. In fact, that was the very first argument that the previously mentioned overzealous Northern District of Oklahoma U.S. attorney used against multimedia in Megamania. Megamania had no alternative display. What it did have was 4 or 8 bingo cards on a screen, and yes, it plugged into a wall, and yes, it was an electronic aid. But to that U.S. attorney, it was a gambling device under the Johnson Act, and nothing was going to change his opinion. That has not gone away. There are still plenty of people in and outside of Washington, D.C. that hold that opinion. The second point of view, I think, that has hampered the tribes, and it's been touched on here a couple times, is that, quite frankly, Class 2 gaming, through the use of these wonderful technologies, has made a whole lot more money than they believed it ever should have. I think that there are forces that believed when IGRA was passed that, well, we give them Class 2 because they'll never do much with it. They won't use, that won't make very much money, so it doesn't need to be regulated as much. Of course, they were wrong, but that's one of those forces. And I think the third one, which is a little bit underlying that, is just the social conservatism that hit the country and grew in the 80s and 90s and into this decade. Social conservatives certainly have other issues that are much more high profile than this, but make no mistake, social conservatives are anti-gambling. They always have been, they always will be. Some people, even some that have been on the National Indian Gaming Commission, believe that a big part of their job is to limit gaming, is to hold back gaming, keep it from expanding. I think they're wrong. I think most of the people in this room think they're wrong. Finally, let me say that a lot of the discussion in the last few years has been about this bright line. I think Chairman Miranda said it best yesterday, and it's a very simple concept. The people that play these games, alternative displays or not, they know whether it's a Class 2 game or not. They may not know that Class 2 is what we call it, but what they know is it's not a slot machine, it's a bingo game. They know this. We don't have to tell them. Almost everybody in this room, I'm sure, can very easily tell the difference between a bingo game and a slot machine. It really is that simple. Multimedia Games has always supported our tribes. We've been very proud to be on the cutting edge of bringing technology, and I'm sure we'll continue to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard. Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman. I guess I look at this as the history of bingo, and I think that my experience and the things that I've been involved in since I got into Indian gaming in 1980 as a tribal legislator, helped write the law. Later, I had to enforce the law, and still later, I had to live under the law. So I learned a lot during that short period of time. I've acted as a gaming commissioner on 3 or 4 different occasions over the past 20 years. I've worked on every side of Indian gaming: legislator, operator, enforcement, and supplier. As I see it, bingo is bingo. It's like the organ grinder's monkey. You put a hat on him and a jacket on him and shoes and gloves, but he's still a monkey. Even if you put a mask on him, he's still a monkey. So what industry has tried to do is to put those clothes on him. They've done it. It's still bingo, and I think that's just the thing that we have to remember. IGRA addresses bingo, and I think that's the limit. There is a bright line. We don't need any more. NIGC and some of the U.S. attorneys have placed artificial restrictions on bingo, and I think this is something that we have to be very careful about. The more entertainment the games can supply, the better it is for the tribes. Before bingo, we had very little discretionary money. Even IGRA limits what we can do with the money. All the programs that were furnished by the federal government, we had restrictions. There were strings, and they weren't necessarily what we really needed at the tribal level. This is the first enterprise or opportunity we've had to use our own money. So most tribal gaming commissions, at least all I've been associated with, and the tribes themselves, want a very efficient, honest, and credible commission to games played at the facilities meet all these requirements. Sovereignty of the nation is very important, and the integrity of the nation, the integrity of the games played. So consequently, we have to, as a tribal gaming commissions, we have to make sure that those games meet those requirements. But there are requirements. As a frontline regulatory agency, as it was said, the National Indian Gaming Commission and IGRA says oversight. It doesn't say operate. Every regulation that's written has been in an effort to slow down or to change or to actually re-identify bingo. And with all those restraints, it's stymied progress with the tribes, and I don't think we can stop technology. Technology is going to continue to advance. Regardless of what we do, it's going to continue. And I think to say that we have to have a bright line between Class 2 and Class 3 is not necessary. As Chip said, the bright line is already there. The player knows it, and that's the one we really need to pay attention to. We were playing different games years ago, before the thoughts of IGRA came about. We had different patterns, we had different types of games, as Mr. Shadeen said. We had to have variety, and we did have variety, and that drew customers. We had accounting systems in place that made sure that we were honest. We had different ways of verifying the winners. Technology helped us do that. By using the serial number on a card, we could instantly bring up whether or not it was a winning card or not. It did stop a lot of fraud, and we did have that. The different styles of games, they're still bingo. It's like, again, you go back to the dress. You can dress a monkey in anything, and it's still a monkey. You won't change that. So what we've done with bingo is dressed it up. We've changed the looks of it, but it's still bingo. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Fletcher?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and distinguished members of the commission and honored consultants that are with you. I'm humbled and honored to be here, and most particularly to be on this type of panel. I'm kind of the oddball, I guess, here. I came in at the end of the history of bingo. Nova Gaming, to tell you a little bit about us, we started our company about 7 to 8 years ago, and we chose to be a Class II electronic bingo provider. Much like Skip, I came out of a different part of the gaming industry. I grew up in industry. My father was in industry, so my earliest memories are at 6 years old getting in a service truck with him, and we were a route operator at that time, going around and servicing. At that time, it was vending machines, amusement machines, and pool tables, and jukeboxes, and things of that nature that evolved eventually into gaming. I was asked to kind of change my approach yesterday by Mr. Green and Mr. Valandra, since this is a historical panel, tell you a little bit about a historical event that I think mirrors a lot of things that have gone on in Indian gaming now that I'm able to know the history of Indian gaming and be a part of that. And I guess the whole point of this, and I'll kind of bring it together at the end to tell you how it relates to Class II bingo, is the point I want to try to make to the commission is that if you relinquish or surrender or compromise your position, your sovereignty, your authority, you being the primary regulator, some of the things that can happen when you start to listen to others that really don't understand what's happening in the industry. As I said, we started our company about 7 years ago. We did much the same thing Skip described. I went and read IGRA. At that time, a lot of the court cases had taken place, so I got the pleasure of reading the results of a lot of those things. I actually went and met with the National Unedited Gaming Commission, along with a gentleman that was mentioned here before, a guy by the name of Jeffrey Standing Bear, and tried to figure out what was a Class II bingo game. Coming from the gaming world, I knew what a slot machine was, what a poker machine was, all those kind of things, but I never had been involved in tribal gaming. We actually went to paper bingo halls. I took my engineers and we went to paper bingo halls and we actually watched the play of bingo so that we could understand how to build an electronic bingo system. That was the first things we did as a company. Today, we're proud to say we're in about 8 states. We have about 100 employees, and we're in approximately 50 properties where we operate Class II bingo. That's all we do. When we build a Class II bingo game, and I'm going to kind of move into some of the things I was going to talk about tomorrow on the manufacturers panel, we look at a couple of simple things. First thing we do, and I instruct my engineers when we build a game, is we look at the 3 basic elements of bingo, and then we look at and try to assure that our bingo system, our bingo game is secure. We try to look and assure that it's accountable and it's auditable for the tribes. We try to look and see that it's fair to the player and easy to understand. And then we try to assure that it's entertaining and economically viable. That's kind of the foundation of what we look at when we start to build a Class II game with our company. But I want to kind of go back and talk to you about this history that I was able to experience in gaming. I've been in every part of gaming. I've been a facility operator. I've been a manufacturer. I've been a distributor. And I've been what we called in old days a route operator, where we actually put games in a lot of different facilities and service those. I talk a little different. I'm from a state called South Carolina. It's a small state on the other side of the country. A lot of folks doesn't know, but in 1975, there was a bill passed in our state legislature that authorized video games with a free play feature. That was the beginning of legalized gaming in the state of South Carolina in 1975. I was in the business then. I was still a young fella. My dad was still in the business. And we had evolved with technology, which is one of the things I think kind of mimics what's happening in Indian gaming. We had started out our business, our family business, with peanut and bubblegum machines. We'd gotten into the jukebox business. We'd gotten into the pool table business. We'd gotten into the big video boom, Miss Pac-Man and Centipede and those things. We ran pinball machines, and that was the evolution of this statute that was passed in 1975, it referred to pinball machines that people, the old original pinball machines, not flipper games, that people gambled on. And that was why we passed this statute in 1975. That eventually evolved into electronic poker machines. There was a guy by the name of Cy Red that was a Seaburg distributor that used to come through South Carolina and sell jukeboxes. And we bought some of the first Sarcoma black and white draw 80 poker machines from Cy and began to put them on the street in South Carolina in the late 70s, early 80s. And so that was the beginning of our big technology boom in the wave of gaming. One of the things we quickly discovered is that the evolution of technology and success soon brings fear and jealousy. And again, I think that kind of mirrors what I've been able to understand about tribal gaming and Indian gaming. So we began to be scrutinized, we began to be ridiculed, and we began to be harassed in our lovely little state, in our family businesses. A lot of our businesses had been second, third, and fourth generation family businesses. Anyway, we kind of grew from 1975, grew through the 70s, grew through the 80s, and by the early 80s, we were starting to catch a lot of attention from the state and nationally. So we kind of went through there and had a lot of controversy because of technology, quite frankly, and because of the success of our business. At one time, South Carolina, towards the end of our business, was the third largest gaming market in the country, behind Nevada and New Jersey. The last year we were in business in South Carolina, we had 28,000 machines, we had 7,000 locations, we had 600 machine operators, we did $2.8 billion in revenue that year, and we paid the state $80 million in license fees. Long story short, in 1999 and 2000, through all this jealousy and scrutiny and things that have happened, we had been debating in the state legislature to pass a new regulatory package. And through naivety, we were trying to be accommodating, and we worked with the state legislative body to put together a regulatory package that would take effect upon a vote of the people. We were not afraid of that because we had been operating since 1975. We'd been operating 20 plus years. We had had 2 referendum votes in the state of South Carolina, which we had won. And we had had what we thought in 1998, this was all taking place in 1999, kind of an understood referendum because we had been very instrumental in electing a governor, the first Democratic governor since Reconstruction. And so the people had he had run as our candidate against the Christian Coalition Republican candidate, and he had been elected in a landslide victory, and we had taken every other constitutional office throughout the state at the same time. So we felt pretty good about a referendum vote. So we agreed to this regulatory package. We passed it in July, and the vote was to take place in November. After that all happened, and we did it somewhat as a compromise to try to stymie the controversy over the success of our business. And we did it somewhat as an appeasement to the population and to the Senate and the House of our state. And looking back now, that was a mistake. We were legal, we were a bona fide business, we were authorized, we were a threat of the economy of South Carolina. There were thousands of jobs that were affected in the $2.8 billion industry. Needless to say, once the referendum was passed, and we were instrumental in helping pass it, or legislation was passed, shortly thereafter someone filed a lawsuit declaring the statute to be unconstitutional. And they said basically that the legislative body did not have the authority to pass their responsibility onto the people of the state. It was filed in one of our local district courts. Luckily, some of us knew the lawyer that filed it. We went and talked with him about trying to dismiss the suit. His father had been a circuit judge. We went and talked with him, and he couldn't talk to his son. So needless to say, 10 days later, our state Supreme Court took the suit, took the original jurisdiction of the suit. It was briefed in 10 days. It was argued 10 days later. And basically, they severed the legislation. They threw out the whole regulatory scheme and declared it unconstitutional. And when they did that, all that was left in the body of the bill was, and they declared the vote unconstitutional. So therefore, all that was left in the body of the bill is we were banned 12 months later. 12 months later, on June the 30th of 2000, you had an industry that had been in existence since 1975. If you owned, operated, or stored an electronic video game, you were a felon, could be convicted as a felon. So on midnight that night, you had 7,000 businesses across the state go out of business. The machine operators, the 600 machine operators that had been operating, some of them second, third, fourth generation families, couldn't even store their equipment. We had to go across the state line and rent warehouses in Georgia and Alabama and North Carolina and places to take our equipment. Now, I know all of you are kind of asking, why in the world am I telling a story about South Carolina? But here's the point I'm trying to make. It's clear from me, and I'm just a simple man reading a bill that was passed by a lot of these historical folks who've spoken over the last couple of days. But clearly, as I understand it, you folks have the sovereign authority to regulate your Class II gaming. And I, as a vendor, look to you to regulate me and tell me what to do. We knew we had something that was right and correct, but we tried to appease, and we listened to the naysayers, and because of that, we had many folks that went out of business. Those 600 machine operators today amount to about a dozen that took their family businesses and went somewhere else because their home state ran them out of town. And I happen to be one of those dozen. That's one of the things that led me. First, I went overseas and did gaming when that happened, and then came to tribal gaming so that I could come back to my home country and try to do some business, because this is all I know. I didn't have any other choice. I grew up in this and wanted to do that. But the point I'm trying to make is when you surrender that authority and that sovereignty and you start listening to the naysayers, these are the kind of things that can happen historically, and these are the kind of things that happen to us. A couple points I wanted to make, kind of jumping over to some of my comments I was going to make as a manufacturer. I've heard a lot of discussion the last few days about this bright line. As Mr. Johnson said, and a lot of people have said, I've never really quite understood that. I've built a slot machine, and I've now built a bingo game. And they're no two things alike. They're not even close. Mr. Miranda yesterday talked about that bright line, and he described some things like players in the seat and the revenue and things of that nature. If you sit down and talk with engineers, and I've got a lot of those guys, you cannot ever, in my humble opinion, build a bingo game that's going to ever be as profitable as a slot machine. You can get close because of technology. But the math models are totally different. You're restricted by the fact that you're playing bingo. In a slot, there's so many variations and so much more things I can do that I cannot do if I continue to play basic game of bingo. That's the bright line. That's the big bright line. It's two different games. There's no similarities there at all. In closing, one of the things I wanted to say is I was asked some questions about what the tribal regulators face today in regard to technology advances. When we build a game today, just as when we started building our first game 7 or 8 years ago, we still look at the same basic things that I described earlier. We look to see if it's got those 3 elements of bingo. And then we use whatever advancements of technology are out there, and we search those out to make that game entertaining and economically viable. Writing regulations which are not a burden on operations but necessary to keep up with changes in technology is a difficult mission. But I've seen tribal regulators do that from New York to Oklahoma to California. We as a vendor, or we at NOVA, believe that tribal regulators face a greater challenge from the states and the federal government than it does from us, the manufacturers in the Indian gaming industry and technology, because of the political agendas being expressed from outside the Indian nations, which are nothing more than the voices of competition. We support tribal regulators as y'all write the regulations and face these challenges with technology. Tribal regulators must stay the course on Class II and not be distracted by outside forces trying to change Class II gaming into a game that does not provide the maximum in player enjoyment and tribal revenue. Competition from anti-tribal forces always tries to make Class II gaming less fun and less profitable. That's been my experience. They will continue these efforts as part of business and political competition. The tribal regulators are not only the primary regulators of Class II gaming. In my humble opinion, you're the protectors of Class II gaming, which I think is much more important. You are the folks that define to us what we do to fit within that definition of bingo, you folks. And so you're the protectors of Class II gaming. We respectfully need you to continue to be that. We need your help in that as we as manufacturers use all the things that are available to us through technology to create these games that players like to play. We're committed to that, and at Nova Gaming we'll continue to be committed to that. And again, Madam Chair, appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak in such an esteemed crowd. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fletcher. I'm sure we have plenty of questions for you gentlemen, but we're going to take a 10-minute break first and then reconvene with the question